Hello and welcome to the tutorial sewing video for Cottagecore stays. There's a link to the sewing pattern PDF in the description below the video. This is a pretty simple pattern made with the intention of being good for beginning to intermediate sewers. You can get it done in a weekend. I think there's a lot of potential for surface embellishment like embroidery or painting or other fun things like that. It can be very bust supportive if you make it in stiffer fabrics. It can also be great as like a soft piece that's going over a bra or something like that if you just want like an extra garment piece to be able to color coordinate and go with different costumes. So without further ado, here's the tutorial. Alright, just to walk you through supplies really quick. This is some soft coutil. It's not even like the starched heaviest stuff you can get. This is what I'll be using for the main fabric or the outer layer. It's like a synthetic satin, but since it's kind of wimpy, I'm going to use this fusible webbing to fuse it to some, what is this, like a coated cotton or like a really lightweight twill. This is the petersham ribbon for the binding. You can see it's not like grosgrain where it has the straight edge. It's got all these little bumpies. So it is a little more flexible around curves. You can steam it and stretch it. It's wonderful. Some grommets. I'm going to use spiral steel for most of the boning, but then I'm going to use this rigid steel for just the center front edges because I just want it to be a little more structured than the first time I made it. This is the plastic needlepoint canvas for the stomacher. It's my favorite solution for keeping the stomacher from kind of crunching as you're trying to lace it up, and this is the 1/2" flat steel for that. You can see it's quite rigid as well, and I really love this for a more structured option. I've got my paper pattern printed out. I'm going to trim it and tape it, and then I've got some undyed silk ribbon that I will be using for the lacing for the front and the straps. All right, let's get to it. If you're taping these together, I recommend to trim the margins and add one page at a time rather than doing rows, as I just feel like it helps line them up a little easier. So now we've got it all taped together. You can see it looks like this. There's no space, or like, you know, as minimal space as you can make it between, like the diamonds should actually be touching. And now we can go ahead and cut each piece out. You can see this one does not have any seam allowance. The needlepoint canvas, I just lay it on top and you can still see the pattern like kind of through it. So I'll just lay it on top and then like marker the seam line around it. And that will be great. Right, so just showing you what I mean about that stomacher. I use one of the straight sides for this. I don't think there's a huge difference if you cut it on a different grain, so don't worry too much about that. But yep, just line it up, cut it out. If you're using fusible webbing like me, I like to lay it on top of the paper because you can see through it. And then just cut like 1/8 inch inside the edge so that when you're using your iron to fuse it to your main fabric, you don't get sticky bits on your iron or your ironing board. Alright, so I've cut all of the fabric pieces out and I thought I would show you the layers really quick and what everything looks like. Here's the needlepoint canvas cut out. Just to show you, with this one strap piece, we have the coutil, which is going to be my strength layer. And then these three are going to combine to become one fabric. So we have the satin, we have the thin cotton twill, and we have the heat fusible webbing that's going to glue the two together. So each pair will get this in between the two layers, and it'll become all one piece. I'm doing this because this is like a hammered satin or crepe back satin. It's very wimpy. I wouldn't trust it to hold up against the tension of boning channels. I will show you a fabric that I would use for that. So I have a whole bunch of this cotton upholstery jacquard, and it's pretty thin, but it's like so strong. I can't deform the weave despite it having some longer floats on the backside. It's got a woven pattern. It's really, really strong though. This I would trust on its own to act as a single layer. I wouldn't feel like I would have to do the fusible and backing trick. So just something to consider when you're picking out fabrics. Okay, so in each piece, we're using this one as an example, you should now have a mirrored set of your main fabric and a mirrored set of your strength fabric. It should be cut with this arrow parallel to like the woven edge of your fabric or perpendicular to the cut edge when they cut it at the table. At this point, once it's all cut out and ironed flat, we are going to go ahead and mark markings like this on the piece. If you wish, you can also go ahead and mark the seam line. I don't usually, but like I said, if you wish to, you can go ahead and do that. So for this, I'm just going to use either a little heat erasable pen, or if it's a darker color, I'll use this chalk mechanical pencil, or even the older style, like square chalks. And I go ahead and mark this on the right side or the face side of the fabric, not this side. So yep, we've got some there. We've got this one at the side, the matching one at the back here. And then the only other thing I do like to mark on these, I like to give myself just this 1-inch seam line since it's kind of large and it's not as easy for me to like guesstimate by eye when I'm sewing it. So that I will mark on the wrong side of this piece, which I'll show you in a minute. Alright, so the last thing that we're marking at this point is going to be that diagonal bone on the front. It's a straight line, so I like to do this just by marking each end and then connecting them up with a straight ruler. This will be marked on the right side of the strength layer, but you could do it on the right side of the main layer if your needle quality is better there. You need to because it's like a funky material. Alright, so we're going to start with the back pieces on assembly, and I'm going to show you how to do this little envelope seam that I love so much. So I'm going to start with the left half of the back, and we're going to put the strength fabric and the main fabric wrong sides together, like this. And I'm going to use some pins to hold them together at the edge that we're going to sew. And apparently this was some stiff fabric. Once that's done, we're going to add the other side, right side together on the top, and the strength layer right side together on the bottom to make this nice little sandwich. So we've got all 4 layers. You can readjust the pins to hold all of the layers. Honestly, the little clips work really well here too, if you have them. But once we get this all together, we're going to take it over to the machine and sew straight down the center back, that 3/8 inch seam allowance. Now that that seam is sewn, before we go ahead and press it, we're going to trim down some of the seam allowances, especially if you have some thicker fabric that's going to make a bulky part of the interior. So I'm cutting one of the strength fabric layers down to like 1/8 of an inch, really pretty small. I'll cut the next strength layer like slightly bigger, like maybe 1/4 of an inch, and then just leave the 2 main fabric layers how they are already. And that will just help the back lay a little more flat and not have like an obvious line from where the seam allowance is sitting. This step is totally optional, but I think it helps a lot in not making any like bulky or hard crunchy parts in the stays. And finally, it's time to press the seam. So we're going to start on the strength layer side and just go ahead and steam this open as much as we can. If you want to use a little bit of wood like I am here, this helps get an extra crispy flat seam by removing the heat and the steam quickly. So you don't have to like sit there and wait. And we'll just do the same on the top. The cool thing about this seam is that it's fully enclosed. You're sort of sewing the lining and the outside all together. That's part of what makes this a quick project. So if it's a little weird at first, just stick with it and try it out. I think you'll like it. We're going to do the same thing on the top here, just to help it be all flat and pretty. And there we have our center back seam. Next up is marking and sewing this little bone channel that's going to be to the left of the center back seam that we just sewed. You could do it on the other side if you want, but I like to do it opposite from where the seam allowance ended up just to help equalize the bulk in that area. All right, at this point we can sew that center front seam. So we're going to put the front pieces right sides together and sew that 1-inch seam allowance that I marked earlier. Once that's sewn, we can bring it over to turn it and press it. So the first thing we're going to do is just set this seam nicely. This could be a great way to combat if you've got like slightly too tight tension. So we're going to fold it with all the seam allowance going towards that side. I'm going to use a press cloth whenever the iron's going over the satin, just because I don't want the satin to scorch. If you did use heat erasable pen like me, be careful not to erase your lines until later, that is, when you need them. Now that we've got that pressed, I'm going to do this little move so that that front edge will be a nice fold. If you need to cheat one layer slightly, like roll one a little smaller and one a little wider, that's totally fine. I usually try to roll it like so that you won't see the strength layer or the lining layer fabric from the outside. We go ahead and give this edge a nice press. And then we'll go back to the sewing table to start sewing some channels and putting some pieces together. Now that we've got that front edge pressed, we can mark the channels that are right at the front edge. These two you could mark on the strength layer if you want. I'm doing them from the outside because my needle stitch quality is a little bit better from this side. So I'm going to do them in the same way that I did the diagonal bone, just by marking the ends and then connecting them with a straight ruler. If you're more of a gremlin sewer, you could also just do this like with your machine foot. But I'm trying to show you the nice way, okay? So just go with it. If you have one of the sizes where the diagonal bone runs into the straight bones here, do go ahead and give yourself a little gap so that you can still put all the bones in from the lower edge, and you will see why this is important later. So now we can go ahead and sew the channels on the front pieces. So this is an optional step, but it can be really helpful if you're getting a lot of wrinkles or tension lines around the body. You can see that I've sewn the bone channels that go down the center front, but I haven't sewn the diagonal one yet. And what I'm trying to do here first, and I'm going to get the ham out. There we go. And you'll see that this will make it a little easier. So I'm going to try to pin the layers with a little bit of curve first, so that when they're wrapping around the body, the outside fabric has to travel a tiny bit farther than the inside layer. And so I find that pinning it while it's in this curve really helps with that. So that way the outer layer won't pull too tight. That could contribute to bones wearing through it as well. So it's a great trick to know. The fancier way to do it is by hand basting with like a large pad stitch, like a 2-inch long pad stitch. And sometimes I will do that, especially if it's like a slipperier fabric, but this one's pretty nice. All right, so we're coming back to the other pieces now. You can see we've sewn that center back channel. I'm going to put that aside for a minute. Our front pieces, which now have the diagonal bone channels sewn as well as the front. We're going to attach the side piece with that envelope method that we used to sew the center back seam. So we're going to stack them the same way, where we're going to put the right sides of the main layer together and the right sides of the strength layer together, and just sew the whole stack all in one go. These side seams are going to get the same treatment the center back did, where I'm going to grade the seam allowances down. This just means trimming them to reduce the bulk. And then we will press it and go ahead and sew the bone channel on the other side of this side seam that'll be on the front piece. All right, now that that bone channel is sewn, this side piece is going to get the same curvy pin treatment. Because this is arguably the part of the body that has the most curve, this kind of side back piece. So I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of pin it in the seam allowance here to help it hold that curve. I didn't put any bone channels up this piece, but if you decided to add some more in your version, you could go ahead and sew it at this point. But after we get this pinned, we're going to attach it to the back. But before we attach it to the back, please go ahead and baste along that curve. You can use like a machine stitch or hand stitch. All right, so to put these together, we're going to sew only the main layer, or the outside layer of the back to the curve here. I'm not sure why I took a finger at y'all, but I'm going to show you how to pin a curve, just in case, because I feel like nobody ever showed me this, and it's a good trick to know. So we're going to start pinning at the match marks there that are a little bit further up, and we're going to just work in both directions. You're probably going to have like extra seam allowance essentially in the edge of the back, but that's okay. We're aiming for the seam lines being what's matching up. So I'm using my thumb to kind of like hold the fabric down while pivoting around it. And what this can allow me to do is match up the seam line. So all of this like extra fabric that's right at the cut edge can go where it needs to go and be distributed nicely. You're actually going to see when I get to the end here that I've made an oopsie because it's not going to quite match up. So what you do, what I probably should have done, is start by matching up the end, and then you can work from that end into the middle. Curves are very stretchy, so they can sometimes take some finessing and redoing of things, and that's totally fine. It's part of the process. So I'm trying to match it up right at that 3/8 seam allowance and what's the waist edge essentially. And then doing the same trick where I'm matching up the cut edges and kind of pivoting the fabric around my thumb. But that's all going to work out great. We're going to go take that over to the machine and sew it when this is all pinned. Now that that's sewn, we need to press it, and this whole seam has to get pressed toward the center back because the center back strength layer is what's going to finish this area and cover that seam allowance. In this curve, you can also trim it down, grade it. In this upper area that's a little more curvy, you can even like clip, like cut a little notch straight into that area if the tension is too high and it's not wanting to lay flat. You can just cut a little bit of the seam allowance. I'm going to do this from both layers. Be careful not to fold up the loose layers and crunch them while you're doing this. All right, and now to finish up this seam, we are simply going to take the strength layer that's on top right now, fold the seam allowance under so that the fold meets the seam, and we're going to pin it in place. I like to pin perpendicular to the seam in this case because I can kind of feel them from the outside and take them out a little easier. If you wanted, you could also like hand baste this with a big running stitch or something if the pins were just like too in the way. But yeah, we're gonna finish pinning this, and then I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna flip it over, and we're going to top stitch through all layers, like maybe a millimeter or two inside that seam to catch everything. It'll be on the back piece. So here's what it looks like sewing that seam. You can see me reaching underneath and taking pins out as I go. And then I'm also going to show you what it looks like on the back. If you notice that you missed any areas, you can totally repin and just stitch that area again. So now that we've got the body put together, we can put the straps on. I have built a little curve into this since it's going over the curvy part of my shoulder, but you don't have to. This is going to get envelope seamed on, same way we did the center back and the side seam. All right, so we've gone ahead and sewn that shoulder strap on. Just like the other times we've done the seam, you can grade it if it's too bulky, and then we're going to press each layer so that everything's going toward the strap. I didn't show in the illustrated instructions a top stitch at this point, but it's not necessary. I like to do a little top stitch on the strap, like a 1/4 inch up from where the seam is, just to kind of solidify everything. But you could leave it off if it's gonna like interrupt the pattern of your fabric or anything like that. And now it's time for the exciting part. We're going to bind the top edge. This is going to happen before any bones go in. I like to at least check the center front corner, both the top corner and the bottom corner against the paper pattern, just in case the layers have like shrunk or shifted or anything like that. And then it can be helpful to go ahead and mark that 3/8 inch seam line at the top. I don't usually, honestly, just because I find that it doesn't usually move too much on me. But if you have any seams where the cut edges don't quite match up anymore, this can be a good time to kind of blend, like draw a line just right in between the two. And once this is all marked and done, we are going to use the machine at maybe like a 3mm stitch length and stitch just like 1/8 of an inch or 2mm inside that marked line. So we're going to cut it off after that point. So we want the stitch not to be right on the seam line, but like just inside it. This is going to help us control the stretch around this top edge, and it's also going to help us place the edge binding. So here you can see I'm sewing just inside that marked seam line edge. I'm using a small stitch length because this is one of the things that the bones might press up against if the seam binding stitch is failing. So we just go ahead and stitch like this all around this top edge, which is going to include going up onto the straps. And then after we're done with this stitch, we can go ahead and trim off the seam allowance of the entire top edge. So we'll be trimming along that red 3/8 inch line that I marked. So here we are trimming off that seam allowance. I'm using a rotary cutter. You could of course use shears if you like that better. Be very careful not to cut your fingers if you are using a rotary cutter. But yep, just keep going all the way around. All right, and it's binding time. I'm going to show you the petersham ribbon binding first, and then I'll show you the fabric straight gain strip binding at the end to do the lower edge. You can choose either one you want for either edge. So I start at the center front in this case by just folding a little bit of it over the edge and then tucking the top length. And I do a little back tag here to start. I'm using like a 2 or like 2.2 millimeter stitch length. And we just kind of fold it as we go. If you wanted, you could try to like pre-pin it, but honestly, the pins really get in the way and make it so annoying. You can totally do it like this. Just try to stretch around the curves. If it's easier to stretch the ribbon, you can do that. If it's easier to stretch the fabric, like you'll see me do here a little bit, like when it's an inside curve, I kind of stretch out the fabric with my left hand while I'm going. I have a knee lift presser foot, which makes this really, really easy. So your mileage may vary, but this is still my favorite edge binding. It's just so quick and very flat and very clean and very durable. But you can see around this underarm curve, stretching out the main fabric a little bit, and this whole time I'm trying to keep it more or less like I'm folding the ribbon right in half, but I am putting like very slightly more on the underside so that it catches, so I don't get any little gaps. But yep, you can just keep going around the whole thing. I am going to show you the tip of the strap here really quick because I don't think I've talked about that curve yet. And for that trickier curve where you're going around such a small area, you can use like a pin or even the tip of some pointy tweezers or something like that to help you kind of do a couple little tucks in the ribbon as you go around the tip of the shoulder strap where it's this very, very tight curve. And it's okay if it's a little messy here because the way that I set the grommets at this point is always like a little bit over the ribbon edge anyway. So try to work smarter, not harder. You can see I'm folding the underside and then I'll grab a pin to help me kind of fold the top side in where I want it to go. And just do like a stitch or two at a time going around this curve. But there's only 2 of them, so you could do it. I believe in you. Keep sewing and I'll see you on the other side. So JK, it's not the other side, but it is the center back point. Now, this point can be a little tricky. It's going to feel like you have to kind of smash extra ribbon of the folded edge in order to get enough to stitch around. That's a little hard to explain. If it makes it easier, you can do like one side and then the other, or even hand stitch for a little bit at that point. But basically, it's going to feel like you have too much ribbon at the fold where it's traveling over the edge, and like just barely enough ribbon a 1/4 inch away where it's the edge of the ribbon. The other thing I wanted to show you is the end. So I stop maybe 5/8 away from the end. I cut the thread and then I go ahead and trim the ribbon, maybe about a 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch away from the folded edge, so that I have just enough to do the same little foldy trick I did at the start, where I wrap the end of the ribbon around the center front and then the top over. And then I can pick up where I left off and finish sewing right over that edge. And then just to show you that I missed part of the back side of the ribbon in the V point here, I went ahead and pinned it in place and then stitched from this side to make sure that I caught all of that ribbon edge. And here it is from the front side. A little steam iron will help shrink that even more. I'm going to do grommets at this point because my grommet setter really hates when I try to do grommets near a bone. If yours does not, or if you're doing them by hand, you could feel free to wait until the end when you've already put the bones in. But to mark these, I just scoop them on the paper pattern right next to it and make sure the center front top corners lined up. Just go ahead and mark these, and I'm going to use my little grommet press to set those grommets now. If you shortened or lengthened this pattern, you may need to redistribute your grommet markings at this point and make sure they're still all equal and that you don't have one that's like on the edge where the binding is going to be. All right, now we've got grommets set and we can finally put in the bones. I like to get the center front ones right in between the layers, so try not to put them, with only like one layer on one side and 3 layers of fabric on the other side of it. I try to get them like right evenly in between. But go ahead and shove them on up there. If you're cutting them yourself or you're trying to figure out like what lengths to order, I like to go by the finished length, right? Like minus seam allowances on top and bottom edges, and then take away another inch. You could go anywhere between like another ½ inch to an inch, but at minimum, I would say you need to take away 5/8 of an inch just to have room for the binding. Aha, and right here you can see I realized I was going to have to pick some of this out in order to be able to put the bone in that channel. So if it does happen to you, it's not the end of the world. You can put the bone in and just very, very carefully with your machine re-stitch that part of the channel after all the bones are in. But it's best if you can avoid that from the beginning. Ah, it's so pretty now. We're going to bind the bottom edge next. We're so close. So this is going to start same as before, where we mark, trim, baste. So we cut off that seam allowance, and I have here a 1 1/4 inch wide straight grain strip. We're going to sew this on the main side, right sides together. Again, give yourself maybe like 3/8 of length at the end so we can wrap it around. So here we have it at lower center front. We're going to wrap it over the center front edge and then sew it on right sides together, a 1/4 inch away from the current cut edge. If you've made the Pretty Housemaid corset, that video is on my YouTube and we use the exact same method there. This is great if you want a very matchy edge or you don't want to have to buy petersham ribbon. If you've done quilt binding with bias tape, it's very similar. I like to use straight grain strips instead of bias grain strips because I feel like I like the straight grain. I think you have a little more control over how like tight or loose the edges can be, where if you do it in bias, it's just kind of all floppy. And I feel like when I do bias bound corsets, the edges can stretch a little more than I want them to. There's still some stretch on a straight grain in most fabrics, so that also might be something you decide like case by case, which fabric you're working with. But we'll go ahead and sew this. The next thing will be to press it around to the back side and then stitch in the stitch from the front to secure, which I'll show you here. So here it is all sewn on. The first thing we're going to do is press it down, like away. We'll do that along the whole edge. And then watch me look for a press cloth. Once that's done, the second stage of the pressing will be to fold up the rest of the width. But first we just need to press it like away from the body. All right, and now that that's done, we flipped it over. As you can see, we're on the inside now, and we're just gonna fold the binding in half so the cut edge matches the cut edge of the stays, and then fold the whole thing up again so that the fold goes over the edge. I did not do a great job of showing you this, but if you have seen my Pretty Housemaid video, it's the same method we use there. But I like to do just a little 4 or 5 inch section at one time like this. Kind of use my hands to like hold it in place and press it. This fabric that I'm working with is like a polyester crepe backed satin, and I have noticed with poly fabrics that they really do not love to hold a pressed crease unless you let them like cool in that shape. So I'm using the little wood plank here to kind of help me do that. But yeah, I'll just kind of work my way along the whole bottom edge of the binding. As you can see there now, it's looking pretty nice. It's holding that crease pretty well, so I don't feel like I need to use any pins. If you want to pin this whole edge and stitch it like that, or if you prefer to use like a hand whip stitch to secure it, you can absolutely do that. This is just the fastest way that seems to work well for me, so I thought I would show you here. Oh yeah, and here's what it looks like before it's sewn. So there's the fold. We're going to take it over to the machine and sew it from this side, the front side, right in the ditch where we sewed it on. And here's what it looks like at this point. If you're not making the stomacher, then you're all done. You just need to lace it up. If you are making the stomacher for some extra strength as well as some modesty, then here are the instructions for that. So we've just got one main piece and one strength layer for this. The first thing we're going to do is put them right sides together and sew the bottom 3 edges like that. Leave the top one open. Once those are sewn, we're going to bring them over to be pressed. So I'm going to show you just that it's right sides together. And I'm going to show you my favorite little corner pressy trick for those 2 bottom corners. If you have a postcard handy or any little piece of cardstock, you can put it like right up against where the seam is, kind of fold it over and press that. You can even take the card out as I'm about to do. And continue on and do the other side. This is great for any angle that's 90 degrees or bigger. It gives you ultra sharp corners, and you haven't even cut anything, so you don't have to worry about corner blowout. I like to use the wood to like smash it down extra good. But I like to press both of the corners this way. I do this with the face fabric up essentially, so that when you go to turn it inside out, it'll already be going kind of the way you want it to go. Like the lining side will be less seen, like it'll be more likely to roll to the other edge. So yep, I'm gonna go ahead and press these little corners, turn the whole thing, and press it again so that all the edges are nice and flat. So here it is after I've turned it and I've pressed those bottom 3 edges. It's all nice and flat. I'm going to use the wood again. It helps so much, I'm telling you, to make sure everything's as flat as I could possibly get it. And then we can finally put in that piece of needlepoint canvas that we cut at the beginning. Before we do that though, we're going to go ahead and mark the bone channel that goes right up the center front. I'm going to do this the same way I marked the channels on the body, just by making 2 small marks at both ends and then connecting them with a straight ruler. I marked this channel so that it would fit a 1/2 inch flat steel. If you're using some other kind of boning, you might wish to check that it still fits and adjust the width accordingly. In this case, I mark on the right side because I'm going to sew from this side. I just don't like how the bobbin side of my machine stitching looks, especially through the needlepoint canvas. We're going to go ahead and put it in. It likes to skip the seam allowance sometimes, so make sure it's like all evenly on one side of your seam allowance, as you'll see me trying to mess with here. But anyway, once you get it all nice and sitting on one side, I think what I end up doing is turning it over and like letting gravity help. I try to get all the seam allowance like behind so that it's like main fabric, canvas, seam allowance, strength fabric. Anyway, now that that's all done, I like to put a couple pins at the top just to help it not like scoot up and out of place while I'm trying to sew that bone channel. So just here, like that. And we'll do one on the other side too. And then to sew this through all layers, don't be scared, okay? Your machine can totally do it. You might wish to use a slightly longer stitch length if you've been using a really small one up to this point. So change it up to like 3 or 3.5 millimeters. All right, so once we've got that done, we can go ahead and put the flat steel in. I like to put it in between the strength layer fabric and the needlepoint canvas so that the front side stays very nice and flat. You won't get any like wear from the, there being like a high point over the bone and the lacing rubbing on top of it. Yeah, once that's in, we can go ahead and bind up the top edge the same way we did the rest of the stays. And here's what it looks like with the top edge trimmed and bound. It's so nice. And now we can lace it up and try it on. Just to show you how it usually goes for me putting these things on, I start with the straps tied maybe about 2 inches apart, and I'm going to lace up the front about halfway. You can do like a shoelace or the normal corset style X's, really doesn't matter, just whatever is your preference. Go ahead and put this stomacher in when it's about halfway laced up. Then you can keep going, keep kind of checking the heights because you'll see they love to slide all around. But make sure that like whatever you're wearing under it is how you want it to be, the height is what you want it to be at, the stomacher is at the height you want it to be at, the stays themselves are sitting at the height you want them to be at. And then once all that's good, you can finish lacing up the top and start tightening it down. Once you get it all laced up, I like to go ahead and just tie a bow at the top with long ears, and each like half of the bow, ear plus tail, I just kind of wind around a finger or around my hand or something and just kind of shove. And then once that's done, you can check that the straps are where you want them. I usually want to tighten them a little bit at this point. I just tie them in bows, so it's pretty easy to adjust. But yeah, you're wearing stays that you made. You're all done. Go visit her in Faire or something. You good job. That's all for now. Thank you so much for watching. Please check out my other videos, and if you got something out of this tutorial, I hope you will drop a tip below or at least tell your friends and come sew some more fun things with me. Thank you.